feeling of detachment from people around me, people I love.
Most of that time, I was hoping that I would die.
You're such a fascinating figure because clearly you mean a great deal to a huge amount of people, but there's also people that are outraged by you. There'll be some people that are upset that I'm even talking to you.
Yeah, no, they're not. They're angry with who their imagination has made me out to be.
Right.
That's all. Like, I'm a figment of their imagination.
Why do people presume that your purpose is somehow to create these angry, alt-right incels, where I've read all your work? I don't hate women. I hate everybody. How frustrating do you find that?
You know, it's easy for me to be the representation of the corrupt and tyrannical patriarchy, right? I mean, that projection fits on me very easily because I'm white, because I'm older, because I've been successful. And if you believe that human hierarchies are basically a consequence of dominance and oppression, and that people who are malevolent and manipulative are most likely to rise to the top, none of which is even vaguely true, by the way, it's just not the case, then I'm the avatar of that particular image, at least for some people. And usually people who think that of me are people who've only heard about me second or third hand. They've never actually listened to anything I said or read anything that I wrote.
Some of the things that you say are then turned into clickbait. Do you know what I mean? Like Jordan Peterson eviscerates woman.
Yeah. Men and women aren't the same, and they won't be the same. That doesn't mean they can't be treated fairly.
And you click on it, you go, oh, actually, no, he didn't. They had an interesting conversation. Does that frustrate you as well?
There's an element of it that's terrifying, right? Because one of the things that really threatens the current stability of our societies is tit-for-tat ideological escalation.
Yeah.
Right? So you might think if you're on the right, that the far left is your fundamental enemy. And if you're on the left, you'll think that the far right is your fundamental enemy. But what's everyone's enemy is, you know, I tap you, you poke me, I slap you, you punch me. Those processes can get out of control very, very quickly. And that sort of clickbaity enticement to engage in political dialogue is an enticement to tit-for-tat responding. It's a tremendous danger to us all.
But life is tough. And the only way to make it less tough is to try and be the very best version of yourself. And my point from that is, that's what I've taken from your work. You know, I've read both your books, particularly during the last lockdown. And the whole concept of finding a purpose, I found particularly inspiring. And I don't know anybody's life who isn't enriched by finding a thing they adore and going for it.
Yeah, well, I mean, you set what's great against what's tragic. And so then you say, well, how do you find what's great in your own life? And part of that is you watch. It's like, when is it that I'm doing something that alleviates my suffering, right? It's a real, you have to ask that question to yourself honestly. You do this as a cognitive behavioral psychologist. Let's say if you're dealing with someone who's depressed or anxious. It's like, so, because you don't know why they're depressed or anxious, and neither do they, not really. It's mystery, it's complicated, you know? But one of the things you have them do is say, well, why don't you just watch for a week, like watch yourself like you don't know who you are, and just see when you're not quite as miserable. Yeah. And then let's see if we can figure out what it is about what you're doing in that situation that's lifting the gloom. It's like, okay, there's something in that that's curative, right? And that's something in that that's curative is related to, well, you might say your purpose. It's like maybe part of the reason you're depressed is because you're too isolated. Well, now we can work on that. So let's see if we can increase the amount of time you're spending with your friends by like 20%. Or maybe you need a couple of new friends. Or maybe you need to work on your comic material, you know, because you can set that against the tragedy of life. I wrote the last book almost entirely when I was so ill I could barely make it to the typewriter.
Yeah.
So the computer. When you're in the depths of catastrophe, you have the support and love of your family, if you're fortunate, and your friends, and I had no shortage of that, thank God. But I was writing this book, and, you know, I wanted to write it, and as far as I was concerned, it was important that I do it, and that gave me something to live for continually. And you need something meaningful to set against suffering. That's what you have to set against suffering, not happiness. Sometimes you don't have, that's not an option sometimes. Happiness is like, no, I don't think I had any happiness at all for 3 years, pretty much.
And what is...
It was dire. Well, my wife, she spent a year hovering on the brink of death in a variety of different ways. Before that, my daughter had catastrophic health problems, which have mostly resolved. And then I got extremely ill, so we've been in, and at the same time, we were facing social pressure of like an unparalleled magnitude, people trying to, you know, bring this enterprise to a halt, I suppose. Most of that time, I was hoping that I would die. I've been grateful for the good things that have happened to me. I don't think I was grateful enough before just for mundane normality, you know?
Yeah.
And you think you don't have everything you could have, and perhaps that's true, but if you can sit down and breathe, there's lots of people who don't have that.
Yeah. And I read somewhere that you couldn't even listen to music.
Oh, no. No.
What, and just, why is that?
Well, no, I had no positive emotion at all, and it was too sensory. Like, I was very sensitive to anything that was, any sensory input at all. I mean, last year when I was in Florida, I would get up at about 8 in the morning because I couldn't sleep anymore, and then I'm pretty much on the couch till 3, but I had to have earplugs in and like a covering over my eyes. At that point, I could still lay down.
Do you remember the first song that you were able to listen to when you came out of your illness?
I think it was probably something by Arcade Fire.
Right.
So I really like Arcade Fire. I think they're great.
Yeah.
And
what was that? That must have just been to be able to...
Oh man, it was such a relief. And now I've been listening to music like mad. My wife and I, we spend about 5 hours a week dancing upstairs in our...
That's all right.
Like for a long time, 2 years, every evening I spent with her, I thought would probably be the last one.
Yeah.
So the fact that that's not the case anymore, and that we can listen to music. I have these long playlists that I've been curating for years, that we have an oldies romance playlist that's jazz singers from pretty much the 20s through the 50s, some 60s stuff.
We live in an era of cultural division. So how do we heal that?
Well, I think one of the things that we could do is try hard to see when those across the political aisle from us do something that we at least regard as not entirely stupid and offer a little reward. Unless you're living in paradise, you're stupider than you should be. And because you're stupider than you should be, you're probably wrong about something. And the person most likely to correct something you're wrong about is someone that you disagree with, because they know things, at least in principle, that you don't know.